Hey everybody, this is Mad Matt Carter. Thank you so much for watching the AIWF Network YouTube channel as well as the AIWF Ringside Wrestling channel. If you like what you see, please do us a big favor. Hit that like button, hit subscribe, and ring that bell to get notifications every time we post new videos on both our channels. It means a lot to us, and thanks a lot for watching once again.
Wrestling fans, promoters, wrestlers, and anyone who enjoys pro wrestling now have something new to be excited about. The Wrestling Fans International Association, the WFIA, is back. WFIA is an association that exists to promote, grow, and support professional wrestling throughout the world. Membership is free. Your membership includes a free digital bi-monthly publication of the Wrestling Fan News newsletter, association updates, voting privileges, and much more. Please go to thewfia.org, that's THEWFIA.org, and become a member today. Attention WFIA members, the virtual 2024 WFI convention will be this fall from September 13th through September 15th, 2024. Scheduled to appear are the world's strongest man, Ken Patera, the world's most dangerous announcer, Gary Michael Capetta, Bill Apter, and just recently signed the High Flyers, Jumpin' Jim Brunzell and Greg Gagne, and folks, there's more coming on board. So run, don't walk to your keyboard, get on that computer, check the WFIA.org website and our Facebook page to see when these guys are going to be scheduled and their prices. Folks, if you are not a WFIA member, you will be paying an additional fee. So go to the WFIA.org today and register, become a member, and enjoy the podcast.
What's going on, everybody? This is Pro Wrestling Wire. You can view us here on the AIWF Network, WON Sports, and of course YouTube and Apple and Spotify. We have a very special guest today in Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. How are you, sir?
Very good, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. And of course, Uncle Otis is joining us here as well. And we just want to go through your career a little bit.
Okie doke.
All right. So I understand you started. How did you get into wrestling? I know that you played football as well as when you were younger.
Well, when I was a freshman at the University of Minnesota, I was a walk-on. And another freshman walk-on was a young quarterback from Mound, Minnesota by the name of Greg Gagne. Oh. So Greg and I became really good friends. And actually, we were on the same line together. And hit it off real well, and he invited me over, and I met Vern at an early age, and he really lived the good life, I mean, he had a beautiful home, and he had a fountain in the basement, and he had all sorts of stuff. And Greg decided to go to the University of Wyoming because there wasn't much future for a 170-pound quarterback at the University of Minnesota under Murray Warmath, because he used to run a lot out of the T formation, and the quarterbacks used to run a lot. So Greg decided to go to Wyoming, and he went there after his sophomore year, and then he played a little bit his junior and senior year, and then I stayed at Minnesota and played a fair amount. And actually, the year after, 1971, I played a year of semi-pro football in Wisconsin for the Manitowoc Chiefs, and from there I got an invitation to try out with the Washington Redskins.
Oh, wow.
That was it was a rookie camp, and actually they only kept one fellow from our group, and his name was Herb Mulkey, and he wound up being an all-pro punt receiver, returner. Right. And we had to run it. We were at George Washington University, and it rained like a son of a gun, and it was a muddy field. And I remember they had the backs and ends running 40-yard dashes, and that I heard 5-1, 5-2, and I ran a 4.9, and I thought, geez, that's pretty good. And then this Herb Mulkey ran a 4.6. So he had the fastest time anybody, and he could run like grease lightning, and he had a good 3 or 4 years with the Redskins. And then when I came back, I decided to go. I thought, well, I'm going to go back and go get my degree at the university. I had about 30 credits left, and this was in early '72. And Greg called me, and he said, "My dad and I are going to go over to the Olympics in Munich, and Ken Patera is going to be competing in the weightlifting, and then afterwards, my dad's going to have a wrestling camp, and he wants to know if you want to try out." So I thought, oh geez, I'd done a little intramural wrestling in high school, but nothing, that lead me to believe that I could make it pro wrestling. So I said, well, I think about it. So then Kenny hurt his knee over at the Olympics, came back, and then there was a group of guys: Ric Flair, Khosrow Vaziri, Bobby Bruggers, myself, and Greg were invited to this camp. And the camp was like 6 weeks long, Rick, and it was 6 hours a day, and it was 6 days a week. And we had Billy Robinson training us, and he was a bit of a sadist. He was one of those hook guys that
Right.
submission, and he used to beat the snot out of all of us, and we'd start out the day doing free squats, and we went from 50 free squats to doing 1,000 free squats
Good Lord.
every third day, and in sets of 100. And my legs ballooned like hell, and it actually just helped my leaping ability. But we were pretty tired, and then it seemed like Vern had come over with about 15 minutes left in our 4 or 5 hour session, and then he'd beat the shit out of all of us, one right after another. So whenever we saw him pull up, I thought, oh God, here we go, But so it wound up, I had my first match in December 27th against Dennis Stamp in,
Wow.
I think it was Fargo, North Dakota. And it was a 20-minute draw, and I thought I was going to die in the ring because I just blew up like a big fish. And then I sort of became a little more comfortable, and then they sent me down to Kansas City for a year, and I wrestled every single night of the week, plus twice a night. And they tagged me up with Mike George.
Yep.
And we wound up becoming Central States champions. We beat Roger Kirby and Lord Alfred Hayes. So it worked out good. Plus, I met the Funk Brothers and also the Briscoe Brothers, and learned a lot from those guys. So it was a real education for me, and I I learned my trade the hard way. But it seems like once they pulled me out of Kansas City, they sent me to Japan for 5 weeks. That was a real experience for me, and I came back, and then they put Greg and I together for the first time in '73 and '74, or '74 and '75, and we became the High Flyers and had such great talent to work with, with Nick Bockwinkel and Mad Dog Vachon, and oh gosh, there was so many of them. Jack Lanza, Bobby Heenan. So it was a learning process, and Greg and I did real well together, and I could go right down the alley of my career. But what happened was I thought, I thought maybe I could make it on my own, and being a tag team partner was great. But at the same time, if you want to make the big money in pro wrestling, you got to be a singles champion, and you got to be, a star single wrestler. So I had told Vern I would like to go someplace and just see what I could do. So I went down to Charlotte, North Carolina, for the Mid-Atlantic in 1970. Let's see, what was it, 78 or 79? And there's another place where good old I'm trying to think, George. He was right. He was a booker in New York too. George Scott.
George Scott.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he, when I first got down there, he says, Jimmy, he said, I want you to know we don't have time off here, in Charlotte. And we worked every day of the week and twice on Saturday and twice on Sunday. And I remember doing, 2 or 3 hour draws a week. And I was in the best shape of my life down there. And it was good for me. Again, I got to, see the Funks and the Briscoes, and then work with Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat and Blackjack Mulligan and Jimmy Snuka. I mean, there was great talent there too. And wind up coming back to the AWA and did real well. A matter of fact, I remember I after I left Charlotte, I stopped in Atlanta for a little bit, and I remember Jim Barnett saying, Jimsy, he said, what do you want to do with your career? And I said, Jim, I said, I think I'm going to go back to Minnesota. And he said, oh, God, he said, that'll be the worst mistake of your life, he said. So I said, that's my home and that's where I want to go. So I went there, and it was 1980 or 81. I had the biggest year of my career, made $87,000. Greg and I were reunited, and we beat Duncombe and Lanza, and just had a heck of a run. And Hulk Hogan came in, shortly thereafter, and just blew the territory up. I mean, it was record houses every single night. And then he made a decision, they weren't going to give him the belt in the AWA, so he left. And this was at the same time when Vince, was taking all the talent from all the 26, territories.
Right.
So pretty soon it got to the point where, if you want to make a living, you better go to New York. So I went to Vern, and I said, Vern, I love being here. This is my home. I said, we've done great. I said, we draw well with Greg. And I said, but I said, the houses have been so bad, and I just opened up a gym a few years earlier, and I needed some seed money every month, to keep it going. So I told him, I said, Vern, I'd like to have a personal contract with you. And he says, oh, well, how much? And I said, $95,000 a year. And he looked at me and he says, you're not worth it. Go to New York. So 3 days later, I flew into Poughkeepsie and never looked back.
Wow. That's incredible. What was it like going to New York? What was your, your first experience coming to the WWF?
Well, first of all, George Scott was a booker there, so I knew that we might have a little animosity or friction, but it was okay. The only problem was that Vince had taken up all the major talent, and he had like 60 guys. Right. And there were a lot of great talent. And so he decided to run 3 towns a night. Mm-hmm. And Rick, I'll tell you this, for 3.5, once they put Brian and I together as the Killer Bees, Brian and I worked 3.5 years straight, 27 days a month, which is 3 days off a month. And that was for 3.5 years. And I mean, Vince just, ran everybody into the ground. And, we were making good money, but, we should have been making, twice as much money. Hulk was making $50,000 a week on the
merchandise and everything else.
And that was it. Yeah. Plus, in 85, he made $10 million. Wow. He was the highest paid athlete in the United States. So the rich get richer, and it was a great time. But at the same time, I had a business. I had 2 kids, my wife, and they were in Minnesota, and I'm going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for, actually I started there in '85 and I finished up. Vince fired me 3 times, hired me back twice, and and I worked there. I think my last match was like '94, but
Okay.
I was so glad to get done with it because I was burnt out. Plus, my body was, I screwed both my shoulders up, both my knees, a hip, and it just, I was a young guy, really, at 37 years old, and I'm
Took its
limping.
toll, yeah.
Yeah. I've had 12 surgeries since I quit. And
Wow.
I'm still having problems with my knees. But most of the guys, that were in the business that long, I mean, a lot of them had back surgeries, and Brian Blair had his 5th or 6th back surgery, and Greg's had 3 or 4 on his back, and Hulk had, I don't know,
Yeah, a lot.
yes,
Yeah,
6 or 7. And it's
yeah.
just, it goes with if you wrestle every night. I think I approached 5,000 matches in 27 years.
Wow.
So, and it just took its toll. So, I'm taking a lot of different supplements, for my joints, and I've had 6 operations on my knees, and I've had the Synvisc, and I've also had this where it's not really stem cells, but it's called PRP, and they take out 30 cc's of blood from your arm and they run it through a centrifuge, and it's got these proteins in it, and then they inject it in the knees. They put let's see, they put 15 cc's in each knee.
What does it do? Help
it helps
rebuild
heal.
cartilage?
Yes.
Or?
Well, it's proteins and some other additives that they get, but basically it's your blood cells, your red blood cells, and it's supposed to help you, but it's either it works or it doesn't. And in my case, it didn't work, and the insurance won't cover it, so it was $750 a knee. So
Jeez.
I said I said to my orthopedic surgeon, I says, well, what can I do now? And he says, just ice your knees as much as you can. And he says, don't lift any weights with your legs at all. So that's, although I tell you this, I've sort of been looking online, and they have a new treatment that was developed in London or England, and it's called small n stride, STRIDE. And it's a combination of the blood cells, plus they mix in some other proteins and some cytokines. And what happens is, instead of working for 6 months, it works for 24 months to 3 years.
Wow.
But it's not regulated in the United States yet. So I'm sort of waiting for that. So.
Well, I hope that works. Best of luck.
I know a lot of guys love to have it. They
Right,
like to have they like to have it on their brain too.
I do have a question, AWA related to an extent. Of course, you were teaming with Greg and for quite some time, and you guys made this is kind of going out of order, but you guys made a movie appearance in Highlander. How did that come about? That's one of my favorite movies of all time. I'll just let you know that.
Rick, it was such I think Vern said, they're going to be shooting this Highlander, and they want some scenes. So I think it might have been in New York, either New York or Toronto.
Yeah. I think they advertised it as being in MSG, if I remember correctly, in the movie at least.
Yeah. Well, and I think we were wrestling either the
Freebirds.
Freebirds,
yep.
And they had a couple, quick shots, and I think they paid us $750 a piece, which wasn't bad, but I mean, and if you bat your eye, you'd miss you in the ring. That's how quick it was. So somebody, and then Vern made The Wrestler in Minnesota, and we were in that, and the only part that showed was Billy Robinson, submitting all of us. He'd cross face and say, okay, what do you say? Okay, I give.
I have that on DVD.
Oh,
The
do you?
wrestler.
Yeah.
It's starring Ed Asner, mind
Yes.
you. Yes.
And I
So-
got to tell you about Ed Asner. Ed Asner met us in Las Vegas, and Vern and Greg and he had lunch or dinner or something. And Ed Asner said to Vern, he says, Vern, he says, I got to tell you, he says, that's the worst movie I ever made. And then Vern says, you got paid, didn't you? And Ed said, yes. And he says, that's all that counts.
Was that movie a Vern idea? The wrestler?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
I think it was
All right.
his, and it was sort of I don't know, it wasn't really an autobiography. I've never seen the whole thing. So,
Yeah,
I
no,
just
you-
saw bits and pieces of it. So
Probably don't want to. I mean,
probably not.
it is on YouTube if you get curious one
Oh,
night.
okay.
So-
Jimmy Valiant, Boogie Woogie Man.
Legendary Boogie Woogie.
Wait a minute, baby. Wait a minute. Hang on.
What are you doing around
Who was that
here?
calling you, buddy?
This
Was
is our
that
neighborhood.
Jamie?
You
This
done
is
made
a young
a
man's
mistake.
game.
You should be retired, Boogie.
Wait a minute, boys. Let me take a bite of my king dog.
You say King Dog?
King Dog?
Is that what he said?
What? What? What happened? Come on, boy.
Don't let hunger bully you. Get yourself a king dog, and you too can become a super hunger fighter.
The other thing, so how did you and Brian get together in WWE? How did they put you guys together? I interviewed Brian actually last year. It was a great interview, I thought.
Yeah, he's very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, see, both of us were friends of Terry Bollea, Hulk.
Right. Yep.
So Brian was down south in Florida, and he wanted to come into New York, and he was friends with Hulk. So actually, when we started out, both of us were going to be singles, and then they just happened that, they thought, well, let's put them together as a tag team. They're both about the same size. So we were up in Toronto, and Billy Red Lions suggested, Brunzell and Blair, Killer Bees, and then, Brian thought of Killer Bees too because of the Miami Dolphin defense. They called them the Killer Bees.
Right.
Back in 71, 72 when they were undefeated. So, we had the black and yellow and got the mask. As a matter of fact, the first time we wore the black and yellow tights, Lanny Poffo had just purchased 4 pair from Carl and Hildegard. And we said, Lanny, do you mind if we borrow a couple of those? So we wound up wearing the black and yellow tights and boom. And then the next thing you know, we buy these doggone Liberace jackets. Matter of fact, I'm looking at this right here. Somebody sent this to me. I don't know if you can see it.
Up below. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I used to call it my Liberace jacket. So, we had and then with the mask, the mask, we got over like a son of a gun, but
yeah, that was something that I wanted to ask you about. That was like mid 80s, right? When you started using the mask, I thought that was one of the coolest things, how you guys were tricking the refs and the other, your opponents by swapping places. Like one of yous would be down and behind the apron and you would switch off and come up, and it was actually hilarious to watch how you were able to get over these guys, it was just fun to watch.
Well, thank you. What it was it was a heels move. I mean, heels would have done the same thing, but we turned the table on them and made baby faces do it, and it got over.
You were the first guys that did that.
Exactly. Matter of fact, I knew later on we had a heck of a run, and we had some really good matches with a lot of tag teams. They had a lot of good tag teams there, and I remember they had a 6-man tag, and we had Coco Beware. No, it was an 8-man tag. Yeah, it was Coco Beware and George the Animal Steel. And at the end of the match, guys, all of us had the masks on, and we're running around the ring. And George the Animal Steel had his mask on backwards, and he's trying to eat the doggone turnbuckle, and he couldn't. And Coke was dancing, doing the bird out there with it. And I looked at Brian and I said, Brian, I says, I think the killer bees are done. They were dead. And it was true. Not much longer after that, then they sort of put the kibosh on us.
Yeah, was that a personal decision, or that was them splitting you guys up?
Well, to be honest with you, I see Vince and I never got along, never did from day one. And I sort of built a little wedge in between the office and the Killer Bees on my behalf, because I saw things that were wrong, and especially the pay. When we signed the contract, Rick, I still have the contract too. It said outside revenue, which these action figures they made by, it was, can't remember.
LJN.
Yeah, LJN. Yeah. So we were supposed to get 25% of the gross from outside revenue. That was LJN. If Vince would have done it, we would have, made like 10%, but outside revenue. So it turned out that we were, some guys in the first 2 or 3 segments that went out with the action figures, guys were getting checks for $94,000. I remember the Iron Sheik Cosgrove says, "Oh, Jim," he said, "look at this." And he showed me it was $92,000. And I said, "What's that for?" He says, my action figure. And I says, "Holy smokes." So we were about 5th in line, 6th in line of getting these. And what Vince found out is that he thought, wow, I'm paying these guys way too much money. These guys might want to just say, a couple of years of that, $150,000, I'll just leave and go, retire or something. But so what Vince did to us, and we finally sued him and won, he paid us 8% of the net instead of 25% of the gross. So he owed a number of people hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And that was the straw that broke the bee's back right there, because, he didn't particularly care for us, but the fact that we, sued him a couple times and won, really, he's I don't know if you've ever met him or talked to him, but
no.
He's very high ego, narcissistic guy,
Yeah.
And, I just never got along with him.
Yeah, I get that. I've known several people that have worked for him or under him, and they've said stuff similar. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
So I'm guessing they never attempted to, or had you guys lined up for championship gold.
We were told that we were going to get the belts. Never did.
It sounds like I hear that about from a lot of people. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, so
well, we had a good run against the Heart Foundations, and
Yep.
had a great match, and we used the mask. As a matter of fact, it was Toronto. We beat them on TV, and of course, it was a non-championship match, and it just never worked out right, and it frustrated both Brian and I, because we were told, yeah, you're going to get it, but it just never happened. And if you're a champion there, I don't care if it's whatever it was champion they had, but beyond the world champion and the world championship tag team champions, I mean, you make more money, and
Right.
that if you're going to wrestle, that's the whole name of the game, is you want to make as much money as possible.
Yep.
So
Otis, do you have any questions you want to ask?
Yeah, I know that you've had the pleasure, or maybe the not pleasure, of wrestling like Bundy, Big John Studd, Adonis, Junkyard Dog, so many big names. Who, when you were in your singles career, and by the way, I have to say, you answered one question for me when you talked about how many squats a day you used to have to do for Gaggy or Gagne. And you had the best standing drop kick in the business, in my opinion.
Well, thank you.
You could just, and it came out of nowhere. You'd be facing a boom, and you would jump up and knock him right in the jaw, and he was down. So kudos on that. But
Thank you.
out of those singles matches that you had, who would you say you enjoyed working with the best? Who did you have that chemistry with?
There was a couple of them, and I'll say in the AWA was Nick Bockwinkel, who was one of the top 3 talent in pro wrestling. Period. I did a number of hour draws with him, and he was so convincing, and he had such great psychology. And then Bob Orton Jr. was, and now his son is the best in the business, really.
Right. Yeah.
You know, Randy's just incredible, and Bob had the timing in the ring, and everything he did meant something. And he didn't rush anything, and he was he was the best out of the kids my age. And then Bret Hart was excellent too. Ricky Steamboat was incredible. He was one of the top baby faces. I mean, Tito Santana, Greg Gagne was good. Brian Blair was good. And although the best talent that I worked with, bar none, was Bobby Heenan. Bobby Heenan could do anything and everything, and his timing was incredible.
Ever would have thought you were going to say Bobby Heenan.
Yeah, really. Well,
even though I know he had a great career before he became manager and all that, he was great in the ring. But
he knew what people wanted, and when he was with the WWE, Cripey had 4 or 5 guys that he managed, and he was just incredible. I mean, he drank a lot, and I'll never forget one time we were coming back. We're in the AWA, and we wrestled in Denver on Friday night. We cut back to Minneapolis, and we get into Minneapolis at 10:30, 11 o'clock, and we had to do TV. So we did TV from 12 until 3:30, and then we had to catch a flight to go to Milwaukee or Chicago or Green Bay and wrestle that night. So, and Bobby had he had Duncombe and Lanza, and he had Bockwinkel, and he had like Kent Patera, and all of a sudden, so he goes up behind Vern at this desk at the TV studio, and they're looking at the scope of the day and the order of the matches, and he leans over Vern, and it was Vern and Wally Carbo, and as he's leaning, Vern turns back at him, and he looks at him, and he says, "Heenan, you've been drinking." And Bobby looked at him, and he says, "You can't smell vodka." And then he just kept looking. And it was the funniest damn thing, and Vern couldn't help but laughing, but Bobby was the greatest. He was so precise in everything he did. And he gave the people what he wanted every night. His timing was bar none the best. I mean, he just flew around and just,
he took the best bumps, when he was,
Oh, he was the best.
Yeah.
And he influenced all those guys. He had such great psychology. And he just, and that's to me, that's what's missing today's wrestling. Period. I mean, besides everything, everybody looks the same and everybody talks the same, and nobody sells, and everybody wants to be a badass, and there's no baby face, and they're all heels at heart, really. And I just can't watch it anymore.
It's funny that you say that, because we were working an interview the other day, and that was something that we kept talking about, is the psychology of it is just, it's lacking like it used to be. It's like everybody wants to do these quick matches, hard fought, 1 hour, within an hour time frame. They do 10 to 20 minutes or whatever, but then there's no story, there's nothing to come back to, there's no continuance.
Nothing means anything. Guys do something, and they do these horrendous moves and big falls or slams and everything, and the guys jump right up, boom, like nothing happened, and then nobody sells, nobody I remember working with Bob Orton many times, and I'd be working his arm, and I'd grab his arm, and then he'd foil me, and he'd come back a little bit, and then I'd stop him, and I'd get his arm again. And during the whole match, he'd be working that arm, and telling the crowd, geez, he's hurt my arm, And now it's just ludicrous, the stuff they do. Matter of fact, some people ask me, and a lot of people ask me, do you watch the TV or do you go to the matches? And I said, no. I said, if they want to pay me to come down and sign autographs, I'll do it. But I just, I can't watch it.
I try. I watch mostly the big events, like the weekly TV. It's too hard to watch on a weekly basis. It's, and one of he was talking about the previous discussion that we were doing the other day. It's just that the less is more aspect of professional wrestling is gone, and it does not add the drama, and you don't get fully invested in it. The fans that are watching are not invested the way, I guess, we were growing up in the 1980s and stuff. It's not as dramatic. In a way, well, there's always big moves and just crazy stuff going on. 9,000 pinfalls in a match,
Yeah. Well, Rick, when you look at it, people, when they look at it, they just say, "Well, this is pro wrestling," and it's bing, 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 bing. And originally, this was back when Vince had his idea of all the action in the ring, bing, bing, and I think he was trying to, he foretold the idea that eventually there's going to be comic strips, and also there's going to be games on, in Nintendo or something like that about pro wrestling, and that's come to fruition, and that's what it is. It's bing, 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 and away you go.
Yeah,
so, I don't so much mind the bing, bing, bing. I just wish that they would do storylines, because it kind of makes you want to tune in to the next time it's on. You want to, all right, what's he going to do this week with whoever it is that he's up against, and you kind of, I just think it makes you lose interest if you don't have any real reason to tune in other than if you're just an action freak. I want to see the action,
Exactly. Yeah. Well, look at Paul Heyman. I saw a clip about him, getting beat up and maybe having a heart attack in the ring and being in the hospital and everything. And I remember in 1985, when I was first in New York, and I had Mary, my wife, come out, and we stayed in Manhattan, wrestled at the Garden, and I'm trying to think, Studio 54 was a big hot nightclub. So there's a huge line. And so I thought, well, it was a beautiful night. So Mary and I, it was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. We stood in line, and all of a sudden this young kid comes up to me and he says, "Jim." And I looked at him and I thought, "Who's this?" And he shook my hand. He says, "I'm Paul Heyman." He says, "Come on with me." And we walked right in the front door, and he knew the guy at the front door, and he got us right in. And and little did I know that Paul Heyman would, wind up being a big, serious part of the WWE for so many years, and I had a little chance to email him, and I says, "Paul," I says, "congratulations." I said, "You've come a long way since Studio 54. he wrote back, "Ha ha ha ha." But now, do you know anything about that? Did he have a heart attack, or what the heck? I mean,
no, I think what happened was he got attacked by the Samoans, basically, and he got power bombed, because I guess he was saying that he's not his tribal chief. Basically, he was defending Roman Reigns in a way. So Roman's been off TV for a few weeks since Mania. I guess he's having another bout with his leukemia, from what I understand. But they're building him. They're going to basically, what's going on is they're building him up to come back as like the biggest baby face in the company after having like a 5-year heel run. So, I mean, I'm kind of looking forward to it in a way, just to see how the story unfolds. But I watch a lot of clips on YouTube, right now. So as far as that stuff goes, though, let's get back to, so I guess you guys split up in 1988. You became a singles wrestler. Is that around the first time that you were fired, around 1988?
I think you're right.
Yeah, and then you came back as a singles wrestler, mostly house show circuit and kind of
Yeah,
just
yeah,
doing jobs on TV mostly.
that was horrible too. That hurt me so damn bad, and I would have liked to. Matter of fact, I told Vince one time. I said, Vince, I said I got a hell of an idea for an angle. He said, "What's that?" And I says, "Let me do an interview, and then you criticize it, and then as you criticize it, come on into the by the interviewer." And I said, "I'll beat the living shit out of you, and put the boots to you, and then we can come back in every city, and I'll let you beat me." And he says, "I don't think that'll happen, Jim." But I would have loved to have that, and I was there the time that Kevin Wacholtz almost choked him to death in Green Bay, and he just didn't treat people right, and I know he's in a lot of trouble now, and I remember talking to Hulk, and Hulk had to fight for his money every week, like everybody else. He was a golden goose, of course, of the WWE. And I said to Hulk, I said, Terry, I says, what in the hell is going on with this Vince McMahon? And he got in trouble for this, and young boys and everything like that. And Hulk just said to me, he said, Jim, I'll say this. He said, Vince McMahon is capable of anything and everything. And that's all he said. So
he has a lot though.
Yeah, I tell you, I mean, if the feds press charges against him, he's got a, with this deal now about that young girl, it
seems like there's more and more coming out like every few weeks for the last 2 years. And it's kind of cringeworthy to think about this stuff, but
he's had a record, he's paid off how many women, that he had, affairs with. And it's just
this one is one that he was paying off, but I guess she didn't get half her money or something like that. So then that's when she came out with the story.
Yeah, and then he was using her as sex trade. He was passing her on, the Laurinaitis, and then supposedly Brock Lesnar, and it's just it was horrible. I read some of the details of that, and I thought, my God, what a sick son of a bitch this guy is. And every dog has his day, and he'll get what's coming to him.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Secondhand Heroes and Home for Wayward Villains is a comic book shop and gaming store that also features Magic the Gathering and D&D. Located at 18184 Leesville Road in Ebbington, Virginia, Secondhand Heroes is your one-stop shop for you to get your nerd on. Open 7 days a week at 11 a.m. They don't close until the dice stop rolling. They buy, sell, trade, barter, and haggle, specializing in collectible toys, both vintage and modern, comics, Magic the Gathering, video games, console, and arcade cabinets to play, all set to free play. Host your game night with us. Monday night D&D video game competitions, and so much more. Something for the collector and gamer in us all. Call 434-317-0121 or shoot us an email with any questions to secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. Note, secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. That's 2ND, handheroesva@gmail.com. Come game with us.
Otis, you got anything right now?
No, I'm a little dumbfounded over that. Because I was thinking to myself, my God, if I was Vince McMahon, I would have already had plenty of money in the bank. And during the Attitude Era, he had his lips on just about every female wrestler that worked for him.
Yeah.
He had inserted himself into, and I use the word inserted very, loosely, but almost every segment he had one of the female talents. He was kissing them, grabbing them, having them half naked. It was crazy, but hey, like you said, every dog has his day. Everybody's different. I guess having the money in the bank wasn't enough.
Well, he I mean, no matter what it wasn't enough. Whether it be power, money, whatever. He thought he was invincible.
Untouchable, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just
we'll
to
see.
scoot off of back to you.
Okay.
I also know that after the Killer Bees broke up, you did tag up every now and then with people like Coco Beware, Tonga Kid, if I'm not mistaken. Doing those were just show matches and not.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you were tagging
No.
with them on a
No.
regular basis.
I was just an added part.
Did any of
fill
those people? Did you ever discuss? Hey, this really was some great chemistry. Maybe we should see
Nope.
if the upper management will,
No.
put us together.
Otis, I was ready to go.
Oh, you were.
I had it. I had it with the WWE, and it was just, like I said, I was, approaching 40 years old, and I think I had my last match when I was 50, and it was
Well, that's a good run.
Yeah, Ken Patera. Just I did a lot of indie matches off and on, and then went to Japan a couple times and more, and it was good, and it provided some good money, but
how were the Japanese crowds compared to States crowds?
Oh gosh, they're much more serious. You don't get, in Japan, you have to wrestle. You have to get down on the ring, and you can't be a flash in the pan or bing 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 bing. They don't buy it, and they're a very studious wrestling fan. They know the wrestling, and they've had a lot of good, tremendous wrestlers there. And then you had guys like Brody, and you had oh gosh,
Stan Hansen.
My God. Yeah. Greg and I had to wrestle Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody one time. Oof. And holy Jesus, at the end of the match, they knocked me out of the ring, and they clotheslined Greg, and they stuffed him in a garbage can, upside down in the garbage can. And I says, Greg, stay there. Don't come out. But it was, oh gosh, it was hard, and I remember one time, I went for All Japan, and that was Baba. And I remember I did a 45-minute or hour draw with their big kid, and I can't think his name now, doggone it. That's one thing. I'm losing my freaking memory a little bit more and more every day. But I'll think of his name probably 2:00. Do you want me to call you, Rick, and tell you?
Sure.
Tell you who it is.
I'm trying to look it up now as we speak. So,
Saruda.
Rick, you'll probably be awake.
Oh, okay, Saruda.
Jumbo Saruda. Yeah, we had a hell of a match. God. Yeah, he was. They had, and I remember when I was over there. The first time I wrestled Haku, and he was like 17 years old, and he was 6'3", and he probably weighed about 220, and that son of a gun could jump. Jesus Christ. And I just saw him in St. Louis about a month ago. Honest to God, now there is the baddest person that I ever met in my life. This guy is a wonderful guy. But if you cross him, you're going to pay with something. I mean, he'll poke your eye out, or he'll grab your throat, and he's the nicest guy, but he's a killing machine.
I actually did a convention with him last summer, and my wife went to the restaurant in between like a break, and he was sitting across from her. She said that he was like the nicest human being ever. She was like, "Oh my God, it's Haku." I was like, "Damn, yeah. I'm on the other side selling merchandise in the room." So
I remember I was in Montreal when he got in a fight with Jim Funk. What's his name?
Was it Terry or Dory?
No, it was
Jimmy
Jack.
Jesse Barr.
Jesse Barr.
Yeah.
And they were sitting at the bar. And they were just talking, and Haku mentioned something about the girl that walked by, a beautiful girl, and Jesse Barr says, he says, she wouldn't even look twice at you. You're a big, ugly Samoan or something like that. And Haku said, what? And he went on, they were both drunk. So Haku said to him, he says, well, let's go outside. So they went through the bar, and Jesse Barr turned around, and Haku picked him up and slammed him right in between two cars, and then took his thumb and drove it right in his eye socket, and popped half of his eye out. His eye came out, and Jesse Barr went into shock immediately. And ambulance came, they put him on a slant board, and Haku got suspended for 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, and then Jesse Barr left shortly after that. But I mean, I saw him. He took care of 3 or 4 guys in one swoop of about 25 seconds. It was a karate chop, slap, a thumb to the throat, and then he did the guy right on the end of his nose. And so we're at a guy, and all these stories are true. We're at Cleveland, and there was a little receiver who had his own bar. So the boys went there. It was close to the hotel, and there was about 4 or 5 Cleveland Brown football players, great big guys, sitting there and they saw us wrestlers coming in there, and they're of course they're mouthing off, saying about wrestling, blah blah blah. So Haku's sitting there, and he used to drink cognac and Coke, and he'd have about 10 of them, and he put it down. He says, I can't take no more. So he slams his drink down. He walks over to the table, and he says, fellas, he says, I know you guys want to have fun just like us. He says, but I just want to let you know, he says, if there's any more shit said about wrestling, there's going to be trouble. Do you understand? And they looked at him like, I guess so. And they left. Because he was one man, and I just saw him in St. Louis, and God, he's a great family man. But oh my God, if you got on the wrong side of him, holy Jesus.
Yeah. I know that there was a lot of like drugs and alcohol at that time. But what was it like being surrounded by that? And I'm not sure if you partake in anything, or maybe drank a little bit.
I mean, it was part of the scene. I mean, it affected, I mean, there was, cocaine was prevalent in the 80s and all through, every business. I mean, entertainment was, I mean, businessmen, blah, blah, blah. And it got to the point where it became a problem with the guys, because guys weren't in control of themselves, and consequently, they got in trouble. And then consequently, they couldn't perform in the ring, the way they should. And some guys were losing their, just losing everything. And Vince was part of it, because he was into it himself. And I think that they finally put a deal out where that we had, drug testing, and if you were caught, being positive, you had a 6-week suspension without pay. But there was still guys, I remember when, the steroids were so prevalent, but there was so many guys that it was either alcohol or, painkillers or cocaine, and it became a mixed bag of everything. And there were so many guys that were, desperately in need of help, and it just wasn't given to them. And then you look back on, the toll it took on the talent, and so many guys, died so young, and Jesus. I know when Kurt Hennig died, I was just, I was sick, because I remember him as a young kid, and a real good friend of his, and his dad, broke me in the AWA, and was one tough son of a gun. And it was just, you saw these guys jeopardize, their lives, and thinking that it was, it was okay.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to guys and telling them, you cannot mix all this shit, because if you do, you're going to have a heart attack or you're going to have a stroke. And a lot of them looked at me and laughed. And I said, well, but that was the problem. And it took a hell of a toll on the wrestling talent, for years.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people lost their jobs. Some people lost their lives. I mean, like
Exactly.
Rick McGraw died.
Yeah.
The Iron Sheik got fired, and that's when he went back. I think he went back to the NWA, and then maybe made some final AWA appearances before they shut down as well. So after you left the WWF, I know the AWA was kind of floundering in a bit, but was there ever an idea to go back there at all?
No, they were done.
No.
They were
Yep.
out of business.
Yeah.
Vern just couldn't. I think Vern had $660,000 left of what that was his money. And
Wow.
and Greg pleaded with him. He said, Dad, don't try to fight Vince McMahon anymore. And Vern wanted to run a show in Las Vegas because he had connections there. And Greg said, no, don't do it. Don't do it. And Vern wouldn't listen to him. And he wound up blowing that money, and that was it.
I think in
Excuse me.
the after they shut down, they were it's kind of running reruns in the local market out there in Minnesota, that area. So older AWA TV. Yeah.
Yeah, they did. Well, I think Vern had a catalog of his video, and I think this is what I heard, that Vince McMahon came to him and Greg and said, here's what we're going to do. He says, we'll give Greg a job for life, and we'll give you $7 million for your video library.
Wow.
And Vern says, F you. And that was it. And
Wow.
6 weeks later, they lost the whole business, and Vince took over, all the different territories.
The whole world, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, what ended up happening, it's a real shame because they eventually did buy the tape library. And there's not nearly enough on their streaming network, whatever. There's only like probably a handful of shows. And it's kind of upsetting because there's no like really good quality AWA footage to find outside of that. Everything on like YouTube is kind of sketchy, not the greatest quality.
Well, I'll tell you,
it's a shame.
I've seen them. I've seen a couple matches I had on YouTube. I had an hour draw with Nick Bockwinkel in Winnipeg, which was a great match. And I also had a match with Randy Savage on Monday Night Raw. And the first sequence of the match, Randy grabbed the headlock on me, and I threw him in, dropped down, leapfrogged him, and hit him with a drop kick. And when I did, I hit him right in the mouth. And he got up spitting blood. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. But we had a hell of a match. And he had it wasn't, what was her name? God dang it.
Was it Sherry?
Scary Sherry.
Yeah.
That was his girl who managed him. And at the end of the match, we had a hell of a match. And I wound up, he stopped me and did something. And then he did the big leap off the top rope. And I tell you, you could feel that, boy, when he landed on you, it was boom. So after the match, I thought, Jesus, this is a hell of a match. It was too. And we went through the doggone curtains there. And Randy came up to me, and I came up to him, and I said, that was a hell of a match. And Vince came through the curtains, and he said, fellas, that was the best TV match I've ever seen. And it could have been blowing smoke up my ass, but it was sort of nice that he never complimented me ever. So it was a good match. And that's on. I've seen that. It was really good. It was a lot of action and boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, there is several matches. I watched one that you did with the Berserker.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah. And that was and he looked like he was 8 feet tall compared to you. He was just such a big guy.
Yeah,
and you did your
John Nord.
Johnny Nord.
Yep.
You did one of your drop kicks, and you nailed him right in the cheek and took him down. And I was like, "That's some height right there."
Well, I was a high jumper in high school and college. I was a 2-time state champion, and I jumped 6'7.5". And I had 37-inch vertical leap, so I could, the old adage, white men can't jump. I
blew that out the water.
Yeah, I contradicted that pretty good, but it was funny because Vern says, doggone it. He says, Jim, you can jump. And I said, I know I can. So I remember Vern put his hand over his head and I hit it with both my feet. And he says, holy smokes. So, I must have thrown, at least 3,000 drop kicks in my career. And I'll never forget. Oh, this is, I got to tell you, I wonder where it was. I think it was in St. Louis. Yeah, St. Louis. So I'm having a match on TV. And, this was George Scott. And it was in North Carolina. And it was the first match I had on TV. And George Scott says, Jim, here's what I want for a finish. And I said, what's that? And he says, I want you to hit him with 5 drop kicks. I said, what? He says, 5 drop kicks. I said, George, wouldn't 1 be good? No, I want 5. So I think I started out, I got the guy in the top of his forehead, and in the 5th drop kick, I gave him a vasectomy because that's about how low I was. I couldn't jump anymore. And I said, "Attaboy, George. He's smart." He's the same guy. I'll tell you a real quick story. Cosroe, the Iron Sheik, and I worked a program in Charlotte, where I was a Mid-Atlantic champion, and he wound up beating me with a loaded boot on TV. So I came back and I wrestled him on TV, and I had a sleeper on him, put him out, and I grabbed his boot. So I ran to the interviewer and I said, I'm going to beat, the Iron Sheik with his own boot. So I have a match with him the next week on Sunday in Roanoke, Virginia. So, and it was a hell of a crowd, and we were one of the main events. So I get in there, and Sandy Scott, who is George Scott's brother, said to me, he said, did you get the finish for the match tonight? And I said, no. And he says, well, George wants you to do an hour. I said, what? An hour draw? And he said, yeah. And I says, Sandy, I says, well, you might as well bury me in the middle of the ring that night, because if I can't beat him with his boot in an hour, there's going to be no hope for Jumpin' Jim. And I was so pissed off. And we did an hour, and it was like having 3 root canals with no Novocaine. It was doing with that Cosroe. I mean, it was harder and harder and harder. And I thought, oh my God. But that was George Scott for you.
Yeah. Can I ask you what it was like teaming with Mike George when you were in Central States?
Mike George was a sweetheart of a guy, and he had a lot of talent. He was a real good amateur wrestler. And he never got a break. He he wrestled in Texas and Oklahoma, but he didn't get, he just didn't have the certain flair that you needed. He would have been a great heel.
Yeah.
We tried to get him. I tried to get him in the AWA, but they didn't know where to, if they should bring him in as a baby face, or because he was a big guy.
I seen him there in like the later days, like the last year or two of the company existing. But I know he took place in the Battle Royal that Larry Zbyszko won for the title in 1989. But okay. I thought he was a phenomenal wrestler. It's just,
he was.
Like you said, he didn't get like his break, basically.
It was, he and I had a hell of a team. We had great matches with Kirby and Hayes and a couple other guys. But he was St. Joe, Missouri, and he wanted to stay there, and he married his high school sweetheart when they were like 18 years old, and he had a couple kids, and he didn't want to, he went down to Oklahoma, and like I said, he went to Atlanta, but he never really got the break. And I've tried to get in touch with him, and nobody can find him. And then somebody said, I heard he died, and I said, oh, don't say that.
I don't think so. I think somebody said they spoke to him like on Facebook recently, but it's like I looked him up on Facebook because I want to get in touch with him for this show, and he hasn't responded. But I don't know if he checks it, how often he checks his account. There's some people that don't check their accounts at all.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think he still might be in St. Joe, Missouri.
Okay.
And I've often wondered if I called the city police in St. Joe, Missouri, and tell them my plight. I'm Jim Brunzell. I used to be a tag team partner with Mike. Do you have any address on him? Could you give him my number? and I still might do that, but I called up one time and they said, we can't do that. They won't,
Yeah.
they won't do that. That's just against their policy. So,
Yeah, I'd like to know his whereabouts. And if he's, I haven't seen anything of him dying. I mean, like usually if you're looking up, you can find something,
yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
I can't even find much on him, current at all. So,
Yeah.
but he was really a good guy. And I remember when he came up for my when I got married here, he wrestled in Minneapolis, and he had a real good match. And Vern was thinking about bringing him in, but never did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was sort of sad. And I remember I when I was in Kansas City and I worked, 7 days a week, 14 times in a week, and I made $145 for the week.
Barely enough for groceries today.
Well, and you know what I did? I had a $145 efficiency apartment, and I had two air mattresses. One for my guests and one for me, and that was it. And I drank milk, and I had beer, and I had eggs, hot dogs, and chickens. That was it.
There you go.
Yeah.
At least you had air mattresses.
Yes.
My first apartment, I slept on one of those folding lawn chairs with a sleeping bag.
Well, those air mattresses that I had, a few of them that I had, I was laying on the carpet in the morning because they had a hole in them.
Yeah. Yeah. You reunited with Brian in Herb Abrams UWF.
Oh yes,
What tell me about Herb.
Oh God, he was a crazy guy. He would have fit right in with the WWE, but he was just he was the type of guy that shot for the moon, and he only had enough fuel to get out of a mile up in the air.
Right.
But he was a good guy, and he liked us, and we had some good matches. And he ran Las Vegas, and he ran the MGM, and then I can't remember. We went to Hawaii and someplace else, but yeah, he had grandeur ideas, and
Yeah.
he just couldn't get it done.
No, there was a lot of potential. I go back and watch some of that stuff now, and it's like, it had a lot of promise. You know what I mean?
It did.
And like you said, he shot for the moon, and I don't think he had enough money to go nearly that far.
No,
So,
he didn't.
yeah. And of course, in the mid 1990s, has to be 94, 95. You worked for Paul Apperstein in the AWF. Do you remember that at all?
Oh, I can't remember hardly at all, Paul.
No.
I remember him, but I can't remember. I know it was,
I remember you. I think you were the commissioner or something on TV or something like that.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think I wore a red jacket too.
I think Mick Karch was there as well as the announcer, I believe. Yeah.
I think I still have that red jacket down there.
Wow.
It has an AWA pin with amongst all its cobwebs on it.
I just want to know about that. I mean, they used to come on at like 1 o'clock in the morning where I lived here in Connecticut.
Good time.
Yeah.
For the night
all
owls.
The weird ones came. Yeah, all the weird stuff came on at night. It was quite the unique experience. They did wrestling in rounds like they did in Europe, and but it had amazing talent. And it's just I just think that's another guy that probably had had bigger ideas and not enough money as well.
Well, the timing wasn't right. I mean, it was at the end, and if it would have been 10 years earlier, 12 years, 15 years earlier, it might have taken hold. But I mean, pro wrestling had become so saturated at the end of the 90s, and they'd done this and done that and this and that, WCW, NWA,
Was there ever an opportunity to go to WCW at all, like when you had left WWF? I know you made one appearance around, I think it was 94 and 95 for Slamboree.
Yes. I wanted to go home. I didn't want to, Jim Barnett wanted me to stay in Atlanta, and I said, nope, that's not going to do it. And they had about 3 or 4 bookers there. and they were all arguing with one another. So it just wasn't very beneficial, to go
Right.
there.
Right. Yeah. Otis, do you have anything that you want to throw his way before I'm all out of questions?
No, actually, I'm enjoying the stories. This is like schooling for me. It's amazing to know just all the talent that you have been up against and worked with. It's just I'm sorry if I'm marking a little bit, but it's just awesome to be able to hear your stories.
Well, it was a blessing to me because these fellows who had this talent really brought me along in the business and helped me so much with my timing and what I did, when I did it, and comebacks and everything. And I was so blessed to be around all that great talent for every place I went.
Yeah, but you held your own. I mean, you were a great talent, on your own.
Well, I've always been an athlete, and I'll be 75 next month. And
Rick, we look way older than he does.
But you don't look nearly that old.
Well, I got to tell you, I've been taking supplements all my life. A lot of vitamins, a lot of protein. I still work out. I've had the joints replaced and the knees and the hip and the shoulders. And the doctor told me, my orthopedic surgeon, he said, all you can lift 20 pounds. If you lift any more than 20 pounds, you'll pull your shoulders out of the socket. So I've been taking all these supplements. And when I go to my doctor, he had me write a list down of everything I take, and it's about a page and a half. And he looked at it and he says, do you really take all these? And I said, yeah, every morning I have a little shot glass. My wife has one for her and one for me. And he told me, he says, Jim, one thing I know for sure. And I said, what's that? He said, you have the most expensive urine at Vadnais Heights, Minnesota. But I feel blessed that I had a great career, and I feel like I was one of the survivors because there's so many guys, like we mentioned, that slipped and fell and never recovered, and I knew a lot of them, and I'm just happy. My wife did such a wonderful job bringing our kids up, and my kids have done nothing but great things and got master's degrees and everything else. And, it's a real blessing to have that. And
that's also, testament in its own, for sure.
Well, I wanted to tell you, and I don't have one here with me. I don't think so, but I wrote a book, and it's called Matlands, and it's available at Blur, BLURB. It's online, and I think it's like $25 or $30.
And what was the name of that book again?
Matlands.
Matlands.
Yeah, Matlands. And there's a number. I think there's 40 some stories on there, and everything that I wrote in there is true. And there's a lot of funny tales, and a lot of people read the book, and I don't go down the alley of sex, drugs, rock and roll. I don't want to do that. But it's a lot of people said, God dang, that's an entertaining book. And it's the front cover. My dad was in the Navy, and he was a pilot in air sea rescue. And I traveled. Our family were stationed all over California. And in 1955 and 56, we were stationed in Kwajalein Atoll, which is a small island out in the Marshall Islands, out in the South Pacific. And I remember, having a picture taken. I was sitting on this little lawn chair, and I was just like 5 or 6 years old, and that's the front cover of the book. And my wife helped me with, I wrote all the work and all the pictures were from my personal library. So I just I should have brought one and showed it to you, but I thought I had it. But
It's all right. I've actually heard of it, and now I want to get it even more.
Well, you
to
can
get this.
Yeah, if you punch it up, Rick, Matlands, it'll show you the cover and at blurb and really it's a lot of guys are writing books and they have a ghostwriter and
Yeah.
I didn't. Oh, here, wait a second. My wife just. Thank you. Here,
Oh.
I don't know if you can.
Up a
Can you
little.
see it?
There it is. Up a little,
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And then here's the backside. That's
Awesome.
yeah. So, and all the stories are in here are true, and I got it great. I got a nice chapter on Bruce Springsteen, who was my idol, and I've seen Bruce 46 times, and
I was about to ask you about that.
45
Bruce.
years. And I'm going to go see him. Mary and I are going to go see him up in Winnipeg, November 13th. But
Nice.
He's been very nice to me, and he's taking pictures with the kids and giving them guitar picks, and it's sort of fun. We have about 5 or 6 pictures of him in there. So yeah,
That's awesome.
Something to look at.
I'm glad to see that you're still a fan. I heard you many years ago that you were a big fan, I think on somebody else's podcast. So that was going to be one of my questions. So
yeah, I'm the biggest. I'm the biggest. People say, Jim, I think you're getting a little bit too carried away with this Bruce. And I said, well,
nah. I've
No,
never had the opportunity to see him as much as I want. He doesn't
Oh, my
really come to
goodness.
this area. I mean, he'll
Yeah.
come to like the Bronx, or not the Bronx, Brooklyn or whatever,
Yeah.
but I don't travel too far for concerts anymore.
Yeah,
So,
well, we've seen him. I've seen him, I think, in 13 states, different
Wow.
states. And he just never, ever leaves the crowd wanting more. He gives 3.5-hour concerts and he just
Wow.
plays and plays and plays. And he, matter of fact, Rick, I'll send you, I send out a video of Bruce every Friday, and I have for I don't know a couple of years to about 30 of my friends. So
Okay.
if they don't hear from me on Friday, they think something's the matter because they haven't gotten their Springsteen fix. So, but I thank you so much for the opportunity. I enjoyed it. I thought it went good, and good luck to you. And I'll see if I can get a hold of Mike George for you.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you so
Okay.
much for
Okay.
joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I won't. Happy birthday next month.
Oh, thank you very much, Otis. Appreciate it.